There are going to be times where I would recommend to increase carbs. There is a time when I would actually recommend increasing your fat content. In this video today, I'm going to talk about what to do if you've plateaued. If you've truly plateaued. If you have truly plateaued, if you've truly plateaued, the first thing I would say before doing caloric reduction is to optimize your meal timing. Make sure that you are optimizing your macro consumption around your training. You want to be getting at least enough glycogen before your weight training, and then you want to be fueling properly afterwards. If you're not doing that, you could be setting yourself up for failure without even realizing it. So number one, you want to optimize your meal timing before you even go about doing a macro reduction. The next thing you want to do is, after you've really looked at all of that stuff, is look into carbohydrate adjustments. And I do advise that you use conservative estimates when you're estimating your activity, and I've talked about this in other videos, especially my video on Are You Eating Enough? And even if you know that you can handle taking in fewer calories, I always advise taking in more, just because I think it is very important to be properly fueled, properly satisfied, because it gets to a point where when you do plateau, you can't go much lower than a certain point. So for those of you who just jump right into 1200 calorie or less plans as from the rip, you can be doing yourself a big disservice, because then you're going to plateau and you're not going to be metabolically able to make any adjustments from there, and you're really setting yourself up for long-term failure. So I recommend reducing carbohydrates as a first means of adjustment, but only if you have properly set your carbs to begin with. There are going to be times where I would recommend to increase carbs. I recommend increasing your carbohydrates. If you have been on a low calorie plan for quite a bit of time, I recommend an increase of approximately 40% increase for a refeed day on a heavier leg lifting day before you go into a reduction, because sometimes having the boost in your carbohydrates, which is going to boost your insulin levels, and insulin is going to also have an impact on your leptin levels, which are insulin sensitive. If your leptin levels get too low, it's going to put your body in a mindset where it thinks it's starving. So I would recommend a 40% increase on a refeed before you try to reduce. If you are not moving in the right direction after at least 72 hours after you implement something like that, then at that point I would recommend a reduction, but I don't recommend a reduction before you do those things. Now, fat adjustments. When reducing fat, I advise not making too many changes at the same time. I recommend actually making singular changes if at all possible, because you really want to truly understand the impact of one variable in isolation before adding multiple synergistic effects. So the thing is, instead of trying to change too many things, make sure that you study them in isolation. However, unless you're working under the guidance of a coach or a trained professional who understands how these things are going to interact, then under those circumstances you can change multiple variables at the same time. However, giving these prerequisites, I would advise a reduction in your fat grams as a secondary macro adjustment as opposed to the primary. So for instance, I would recommend dropping carbohydrates first and then fat second. The reason is because I like to keep the fat levels as high as possible for as long as possible to support proper hormonal health. However, you can make micro adjustments in the fat consumption, and for most people, as long as you're metabolically healthy, I would say probably about 80-90% of people will see an improvement in a reduction of fat after they have made a reduction in carbohydrates if they have plateaued. However, that's not going to work for everybody, and I would recommend evaluating your fat content in the ranges of 5 to 10% at a time, no more than that. And this is assuming that you use the conservative estimate for your initial macros calculation. So if your initial calculations were too aggressive, if you were trying to drop 1 or 2 pounds a week, it's definitely going to be way too aggressive to make these types of changes at this point. And I would not rely on dropping fat if you were too aggressive in your initial calculations. There is a time when I would actually recommend increasing your fat content. So if you have gone too low in your fat for too long, it will negatively impact your hormonal function. And it is not advised for some females to go any lower than 35 grams, for males to not go any lower than 45 to 50 grams. It is rare that I would see anybody go to those extremes except for under the situation for bodybuilding or fitness competitions. But if you are constantly fatigued, and especially if you're having a reduced libido, you may want to boost up the fat. I advise under those circumstances to increase your fat by about 10 to 20% for a minimum of 7 days to see how you are feeling. And if your conditions are improving, then you would want to sustain that. However, I would measure improvements in how you're feeling as a result of an increase in fat by regained libido, regained improved mental clarity, increased energy, and overall satiety. This will also improve your body's ability to absorb fat-soluble vitamins, improve the appearance of healthy skin, healthy hair, all of those types of things. Increase activity. Sometimes you don't need to change your macros at all. Sometimes you just need to increase your activity level. So if you are making progress towards your physique goals, but you know that you're doing low to moderate exercise, you may want to dial it up. If you know that you're not going as hard as you could in the gym, if you know you are not getting in enough cardio before eating less, you might want to just try to move more. So the problem is, if somebody has been relatively sedentary before they started on their macros journey, and you are tracking macros, and you are walking, you may be doing home workouts, and maybe you're getting to a couple classes, but the thing is, you may not be exercising at the proper level of intensity that you need to burn the proper amount of calories to keep up with your total daily energy expenditure. If that's you, I recommend gauging your activity based off of your heart rate and truly tracking how many calories you're burning. Heart rate is the equalizer. I'm not going to be standing right next to you, so I don't know how hard you're working, but if you are monitoring your heart rate, you will be able to assess that you're training at the proper intensity to reach your total daily energy expenditure that was utilized in your initial macro calculations. So you definitely want to do that. So if there's any other questions or concerns, please leave a comment below, and thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.